All right, Shabbat Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another sermon here at Nazarene Way Church. We are starting just like the OG original Jerusalem assembly, the Jerusalem church led by James, the brother of Jesus, otherwise known as James the Just, started. It started in a house. It started in a home, and that is where I have decided to start this church, restoring the original Nazarenes, the Judean sect that predated Christianity and was comprised of the earliest followers of Jesus' movement, his disciples, and his actual brothers, his biological brothers, James the Just, Jude, aka, his real name was Judas, but, the church fathers, patristics, decided that probably calling him Jude sounded better. And, just a funny quick side note and tangent there on the name Jude. We think because of the Beatles song Jude, for some reason that the name Jude was actually female, right? And I had one of my mom's one of my mom's friends daughters just had a baby or is about to give birth to a baby, and they decided to name like the little baby girl's middle name Jude. And I told my mom, who is a Catholic, a staunch Catholic, I was like, you know what, Mom, do you know actually she's like, oh yeah, it's named after St. Jude. It's, the woman, St. Jude. And I was like, Mom, Jude was not a woman, right? Like, tell your friend, like, look it up. And she's, always like going, oh, you don't know, Scotty, just get out of here. Come on. Don't try to brainwash me with your stuff, because she's a staunch Orthodox Catholic. And I literally took the research, took just a Wikipedia entry and showed her Jude is actually, St. Jude, or I guess, that authored the book of Jude. He's a male. It's a fact. She's still, just decided to discard it. And that's kind of what we are up against, unfortunately. The one thing that you must realize in life is that you're not going to be able to make people change. They have to decide themselves that they are committed to being open, they're committed to learning, and they are committed to just being curious, right? And instead, we find that most people out there are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. And that's why, really, debates don't necessarily work that well, because it's just an echo chamber for all of those watching to just glean onto the little tidbits that, fill up their confirmation bias that they already come into viewing the debate with. Anyway, that's a whole other rant. What I want to get into is that I don't think you don't have the actual sight and the realization of what is actually emerging right now. What is actually emerging is there is a Nazarene Ebionite revolution taking place. It's starting to proliferate thanks to the shoulders of the giants like James Tabor and Robert Eisenman and Schonfield, Hugh Schonfield, who wrote The Passover Plot. All of this research into the so-called Jewish Christianity grouping or classification that has happened in the last 200 years, thanks to the internet now, people are starting to put the pieces together, and there's this restoration of the original religion of Jesus and John the Baptist and James the Just, and they were Nazarenes. Internally, they refer to themselves as people of the way, which you can read about in Acts. And we are starting to piece together with all of our research, and also, thanks to the internet, we're starting to be able to connect with other Nazarenes, other Ebionites, other people out there that are trying to strip away the dogma and orthodoxy and the rules and the craziness that have been unfortunately tacked on to the original religion of Jesus, such as, all of the Catholic Church, their orthodox rules, and their, essentially all of the things that they have latched on and spoiled and injected into the religion of Jesus the Nazarene. We are now peeling it away and getting back to who Jesus actually was. And that is what is taking place right now. And if you don't already subscribe and follow guys like Aaron Abke and Cameron Waters, and they have Abke runs this fantastic, amazing podcast on his YouTube channel, and it's the Jesus Way podcast. And he features individuals such as James and Chris, who are all also other Nazarenes and Ebionites. They're my brothers, and I would even call them friends now. Like we talk quite often. I got invited into their private conversation, this dialogue, and Aaron said recently, he's like, there is this movement forming. He senses it, and I sense it too, is people want to pry away and not let religion ruin what Jesus the Nazarene actually stood for. And that is the message, that is the movement, that is what is happening. And we are not using some, Martin Luther tactic or Reformation Protestant tactic or anything like that. We are going back to the original sources, and with using the scholarship techniques of, criticism and hermeneutics and exegesis. And we are using all of those tools to actually glean out and with a critical detective scholarly eye, retrace and find out what Jesus the Nazarene actually stood for, and go back and say, you know what, let's strip away all of these other things, such as this Pauline Christianity type of religion that has been concocted and steamrolled since the medieval ages, right, into what we see today as this massive institutionalized religion, where you have this, the entire world stopping and, shutting off their entire life and, eating popcorn and wondering, who the next pope is going to be, right? Like, that is like modern day religion. Unfortunately, that detracts and takes away from what really matters. What really matters is what Jesus the Nazarene stood for. He stood for, the two core commandments: to love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Number 2, to love your neighbor as yourself. And as we know from his brother, James the Just, action over faith. Action matters over faith. And you should always care for the Ebionites, the poor ones, those who are struggling, those who ask for help, those that are homeless. Get down on your knees and help them, touch them, lift them up, care for them. That is the OG, original gangster message of Jesus the Nazarene. And I am just a small piece of the restoration of this movement. It's taking place. You right now, the person that's watching right now, you're going to see this unfurl and grow, and get ready, get excited, hit the subscribe button, hit the like, share this with your friends, and let's freaking do this. All right, now, the message today is all going to revolve around the compassion of Jesus and his love for animals. So we're going to get into that in a moment. Now, before we do, you might be wondering, hey, what am I holding in my hands? I'm holding, actually, in my hands the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, which I have taken. You can get this book out there, the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and I've taken it, and just like the early Nazarenes and the Ebionites, which were essentially the offshoots, the earliest followers of Jesus, just like them, I cut out the first 2 chapters, because unfortunately, we do not have the lost Gospels of the Hebrews and the lost Gospels of the Nazarenes and the Ebionites. So until that point, we do know that what Jesus' original followers followed was a version of the Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew that did not have the first 2 chapters. The first 2 chapters, included Jesus's whole nativity story, which there's a ton of contradictions in there, so we cut that out. So, also what I have here is the TaNaK. This is the Hebrew Bible. It's made up of 3 parts. It's kind of crazy that you don't know that, or were not taught that if you grew up a Christian. You were taught that, that's the Old Testament. We just kind of discard that, and we don't really pay attention to that because, it's all about what Paul says, right? And here's all these quotable, fun quotes in Corinthians that, talk about love and you hear at weddings and make you feel good, right? That's like modern day Christianity. You don't even know that there's this thing that Jesus actually read called the TaNaK, called the Hebrew Bible, made up of 3 parts. The first part is the Torah, which is comprised of the 5 books of Moses, and then there are the other books. There's the writings, there's the prophets, And, if you ask yourself, hey, what is the canon that I should follow? It's really quite simple. Ask yourself, what canon did Jesus follow, right? He followed and looked to the Hebrew Bible, but he looked to it with a critical eye, because there are a lot of scribes and high priests that injected, especially over the years, and injected their interpolations, their own agendas into it that took away from the main two core commandments that rest above all others, like Jesus said in Matthew, right? Which I've just stated. Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. So, with that out of the way, I'm holding the Hebrew, my version of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew in my hands until, and I'll be using this, until we actually uncover and find the original Gospel of the Hebrews, which I think someday we will find it, and it's going to completely rip up the foundations of the Catholic Church and their whole made-up, concocted narrative of St. Peter being the first pope, right? Which it actually is just hidden in plain sight. It was James, the brother of the Lord, James the Just, right? Okay, anyway, let's dive into the compassion of Jesus the Nazarene and his love for animals. Why am I talking about this sermon today and Jesus' love for animals? Unfortunately, I'm talking about it today because my best friend, who is not a Homo sapiens, is actually named Brodus Maximus Shepherd. That's right. My best friend is a cat. He's a ragdoll cat named Brodus. You may have seen him wandering around and swapping at my zits right here, my zits, right? Swatting at that, at these. And Brodus is my cat. Unfortunately, he is undergoing right now essentially a set of x-rays and blood tests because he seems to be sick. He's got bladder issues. They're testing it for cancer. So keep Brodus Maximus in your prayers. I'm going to be devastated if something happens to him. I want to stay positive, and right after this sermon, I'm going to be going to the hospital to check on him. Hopefully at that time he's ready, and hopefully he is okay. So pray for one of our fellow congregation members and true Nazarene to his core, Brodus Maximus Shepherd. Now, so that's one reason I'm bringing it up. The other reason I'm bringing it up is because I think it is so important for people to realize, especially in this day and age. I was actually talking in a thread about this with Cameron Waters, who created Christspiracy, as well as Aaron Abke and some others. And there's this realization that so many people, if they watch Christspiracy, which you should, highly recommend you watch this. You can go to Christspiracy.com. Just spell it out, try to figure out how to spell it, and you'll be able to find Christspiracy.com. And unfortunately, so many people out there, their minds are just sucked into this hedonistic, alcohol drinking, 5-course meal, stuffing yourself with meat, with tomahawk steaks and blood, and you want everything medium rare, and it's just you don't realize that you're stuck in this cycle of killing, slaughtering, being okay with the mass slaughtering of animals and the mass waste of them. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's billions of animals that are killed per year for us, for our consumption, and like 50% of them, like the food is just wasted. Why are we perpetuating this cycle? Now, I realize what I sound like. Probably I'm going to sound like how I felt like I sounded like, I don't know, maybe like 8 months ago. 8 months ago, I was eating meat. And if I ever thought about the idea of going on vegan or vegetarian and taking on that life, I would have been like, oh, no, it's impossible. That's a non-starter for me, something I can't do. And what's crazy is I started for like, hey, I'm going to try for a day just being, vegetarian. Oh, that was so easy. I'm going to stretch it into 2 days, 3 days. And I just kind of like took it in baby steps. And I started very, very small. And before I knew it, I just realized I sleep better. I feel better. I feel more connected with God. I like the fact that I'm not eating flesh, I'm not eating blood. And one of the also pieces of motivation that did it for me was realizing that John the Baptist, James, the brother of Jesus, and most probably Jesus himself did not eat meat. And I want you to watch Christspiracy to check it out. So, here's what I'm going to get into. First and foremost, I want to talk about this, is that from the very beginning, God's intent for humanity was one of peace with his creation. Believe it or not, and it's kind of, quite logical and quite elementary to think about this today. Do you think that when God created Eden, an ideal, apotheosis, beautiful type of ecosystem for him would have included his creatures, his animals, which, surprise, surprise, Homo sapiens, we are an animal, okay? Hate to break it to you. Some people, maybe the Bible thumpers out there in Missouri who are screaming, Christ Jesus condemns fags to hell. Maybe they don't think that they are actual animals, but biologically, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we human beings, we Homo sapiens, are animals. Do you think that God would have, of course, according to Genesis, an animal made in his image, right? But do you believe that God would concoct an apotheosis, an ultimate ecosystem for himself, wherein he saw his animals that he created slaughtering each other and eating each other? That's my question for you. If you're struggling to answer that, I'm going to make it quite simple. The answer is he would not want his animals slaughtering one another. And he says it right there in plain sight in Genesis 1, verse 29. And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. Did you catch that? So he says, every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food. He did not say, here's all the animals, and here's a spear that I'm going to give you, Adam. Go slaughter and create a bloodlusting fest to eat all of the other creatures that I've made. No, the perfect instantiation of Eden, of life, of his apotheosis, his ultimate ideal, centered around his creatures, his creations, eating plants and fruits, right? Not killing other animals or creatures. This was the original diet of man. Plants, fruits, seeds, no death, no bloodshed. James, the brother of Jesus, James the Just, aka the first Nazarene overseer of the Church of Jerusalem, carried on in this ideal. The ancient historian Hegesippus, who Eusebius, one of the Catholic patristics church fathers, quotes Hegesippus and records that James was called just and the just one because of his exceptional righteousness. What do you think in the eyes of, the Judeans, the Hebrews, the eyes of God made one just? Do you think it was concocting bloodthirsty animal sacrifices in the golden plated temple? Or do you think, as Hegesippus says, he writes that James did not eat flesh and he was a Nazarite? A Nazarite means you do not cut your hair, you do not go near any dead bodies, so no funerals, and you do not have wine or strong drink. He was that, and he was a vegetarian. That was the biological brother of James. We know that for an absolute fact, right? And here's what we also probably know as well. If James did it, there's a high probability, or a probability, I think, greater than zero, that Jesus also ascribed to that type of lifestyle, right? And I want to share with you a quiet example from Yeshua. Yeshua is the Aramaic name for Jesus. Jesus is essentially stems from Greek, from lesus, I believe it's called, and in English we call it Jesus, right? Jesus' actual name, if you said, "Hey, Jesus, how's it going today?" And if he were alive, he'd turn around. He'd be like, "Who are you talking to?" Why? Because Jesus' name wasn't Jesus. It was Yeshua, which actually the root of Yeshua means salvation and saved, right? And it stems from Yeshu. All right. So, Yeshua's quiet example, I want to share this with you, is though the canonical Gospels are silent on this, ancient Ebonite texts, and Ebonite is a term that means the poor ones, which reflects and describes the original community of Jesus and James, and the Nazarenes and Ebionites are kind of tied at the hip, okay? You can kind of look at this nebulous group, this cloud group, as pretty much being the same. And then Epiphanius in the 4th century, I believe, is a Catholic patristic church father that tries to drive a wedge between those two groups, and kind of like call them both heresies, which is ironic because he's essentially calling Jesus' original followers, the original kind of offshoots of the disciples, and Jesus himself, heretical. Where, if you take a step back, what's probably more likely is that a religion concocted by a man named Paul of Tarsus, who the Catholics essentially rely on as the foundation for shaping their entire religion, that, my friend, is the heresy. So whenever you see someone decrying heresy, know that they are probably part of the RPC clan. What is the RPC clan? The Roman pagan cult. The Roman pagan cult is Catholicism. It's Roman, it's based on Rome, it's pagan. They've created 3 different gods with the Trinity, invented by a man named Tertullian, who later defected, like close to his deathbed, away from the Catholic Church, right? So the man who invented the Trinity actually said, after a while, hey, actually, this is not right. I no longer want to be associated with the Catholic Church. And yes, it is a cult. If you see and go to a Catholic Mass for the first time, which I grew up going to a Catholic Mass, so it's not weird for me because I've kind of been indoctrinated in thinking it's weird. But if you closed your eyes and stumbled into a congregation wherein they're saying, hey, drink this chalice, it's going to represent blood. You're representing blood that this guy, died for, right? Like, drink this chalice of blood. Eat his body. Do you think that you are in some cultish ritual? Like, if you were not exposed at all, if you literally grew up in an island somewhere in, let's say, I don't know, Indonesia, right? And had no contact with humanity at all, and then stumbled into a Catholic church in Boston, and they were telling you to drink a golden chalice representing blood and eat a body, I would think that you would probably think in that day and age, with that mindset that, yeah, that's probably a cult, which it is. All right, so anyway, though the canonical Gospels are silent on this, ancient Ebonite texts suggest that Yeshua himself lived as a vegetarian, following the path of compassion, right? The Gospel of the Ebionites, which we have fragments of, they survive thanks to Epiphanius and him declaring and basically excerpting the Gospel of the Ebionites, and then later burning probably the Gospel of the Ebionites. Thanks to Epiphanius rebelling against it and excerpting it, we have fragments of the Gospel of the Ebionites, and the Gospel of Jesus' first followers. And Epiphanius' rage against the heresies, his Panarian text, it tells us that Jesus was offered Passover meat. And Jesus refused the Passover meat, and he said, I have no desire to eat flesh. Whether or not this exact statement can be confirmed, it fits the pattern of Yeshua's teachings: mercy, gentleness, and restoration of the original Eden. As everyone is kind of put together, Jesus came to restore the original vision of Eden. He's the Alpha and the Omega, right? Jesus did not come to abolish the Torah. He came to fulfill it and to restore it and to take us back to the times when the Torah wasn't inflicted by all of these influences like from Baal and the Canaanites, that all revolved around these bloodlusting animal sacrificial rituals. Jesus came to restore and take us back to the original vision of Eden, which you know and saw from Genesis 1:29 revolves around eating plants, seeds, and fruits, not around slaughtering and killing animals for meat, right? So, that is what I want to say. It fits the pattern of Yeshua's teachings, right? And he came to fulfill the law, not to corrupt and carry on the corruptions of men, but to perfect the Torah written on our hearts in the purest sense. This is not a law of compulsion, but a calling to love. Each of us must prayerfully consider how we live and how we consume. But let us not forget, this is important, the ancient Nazarenes chose the path of mercy, as we have seen. John the Baptist. Do you think John the Baptist, which we find in the Ebonite gospel, John the Baptist didn't eat locusts and honey? Who would want to eat locusts and honey? That was an interpolation, a mistranslation of the manna cakes, which has a very, very close, it's just like one letter off, right? And someone, some way, some scribe made a mistake, and when they were translating it, shifted it to say, oh, locusts and honey. And we just go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Locusts and honey. Everything was probably weird back then. Yeah, people probably ate locusts and honey, right? No, it's much more natural to think that John the Baptist, who was a Nazarite, ate the same type of diet that Moses ate, right? And, with the manna, right? And honey cakes. And that's probably a little bit more of a natural fit than locusts and honey. There's that famous line in the movie Big Daddy where the guy was like, oh, they go together like lamb and tuna fish. And they're like, what? What are you talking about, lamb and tuna fish? Those two things don't go together. He's like, what? Oh, sorry, spaghetti and meatball, right? Okay. So guess what? Locusts and honey are like the ancient lamb and tuna fish. If you were talking about that, and if that was written and you were telling people about that, back in the day, they would be like, what the heck? That's absurd. What are you talking about? The spaghetti and meatballs of today are the manna and honey bread, right? And that's what John the Baptist ate. John the Baptist was a vegetarian, right? So let us not forget, the ancient Nazarenes chose the path of mercy, and so did our Master. So did Yahweh. So did God, right? Start small. What I say is this. In order to become a Nazarene, in order to become an Ebonite, my take is this, is that in order to become part of this movement and call yourself a Nazarene or an Ebonite, it's not required that you call yourself a vegetarian and become a vegetarian. It's not required that you become a vegan. It's highly recommended. And I recommend you do your own research. You try it for a day, for a week. See how you feel. See how you sleep. See how you see others who are gorging themselves at restaurants with tomahawk steaks, with blood on rare dripping down their cheeks. It makes you realize this kind of incestuously disgusting society going on all around you. And I'm not saying that that's you if you eat meat. I'm just saying that you start to notice stuff when you take a step back and think about and test it out and see how you feel. See how you feel spiritually, see how you feel in terms of physically, physiologically, see how you sleep, and just test it out. Then do your own research. Research for yourself. And I highly recommend you check out Christspiracy. Okay? And just open your mind, open your eyes. And this is a lot bigger than just some hidden agenda to become a vegetarian or vegan. I don't really care about that at all. What I care about is, I think, our modern day Nazarenes and Ebionites. There's this movement taking place. And our purpose, the higher level picture and movement, is we're essentially We want to strip away all of the annoying stuff out there about religion. We want to rip away all of the noise, and we want to maximize the experience in religion and the teachings of Jesus. You can call us Jesus maximalists if you want, right? And restoring the true way and not letting religion ruin what Jesus stood for and the religion and movement that Jesus fought for. That's what it's all about. And when you become essentially a quote-unquote Jesus maximalist, that's what it's all about. It's like, wouldn't you want to actually get closer to the faith and the religion that, Jesus was a part of? If the answer is yes, then you're about to go on a quest and explore, and that quest is going to take you to places that you may have not expected, such as the fact that, Jesus was a vegetarian. John the Baptist was a vegetarian. Jesus had biological brothers. They did not abolish the Torah. They kept it. If they were alive today, if they were holding a sermon, they'd probably wear tzitzits. They'd probably cover their head just like we know James the Just did, right? That's why I cover my head. I've taken the Nazarite vow. If I took this off, you would see that my hair's grown long. And I, haven't drank in quite some time. You saw me a few sermons ago sipping my non-alcoholic IPA, which is a fantastic replacement. Just start in baby steps. See what your life turns out like. See how much better you sleep. See how much less of the time you say stupid things that you regret the next day. See what your life turns into. Again, it's not required. It's highly recommended. And watch Christspiracy. Stay tuned for the revolution. Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Take care of the Ebonites, the poor ones. And let's rock and roll, baby. I'll see you next week.